And there we are, Andrew. We
Okay.
are live. And whenever you tell me you want the screen, I will put the screen up for you.
Okay. In a moment. Well, welcome everybody. I put a heading: Amos, the first liberal Jew. Of course, he wasn't. Lily Montagu was the first liberal Jew, but be that as it may, let me ask you the question to think about. What is a liberal Jew? What are the values? What are the beliefs? What are the characteristics of a liberal Jew by which we might judge Amos? I suppose we might say it's, ideally I'd ask you to reply back, but I don't think we've got time for that. But maybe just give me, somebody wants to just unmute yourself, one sentence, and we'll see how many sentences. What is a liberal Jew? I haven't got time to wait, so...
Modern forward thinking.
Jew is, it can be described best by what he is not.
Oh, well, okay, well, I'm not going to, okay, thank you. I'm not going to describe any knots. I want a positive thing here. We're not liberal Jews because we don't. Next one.
Tolerant.
Tolerance, okay.
I was going to say tolerance as well.
Yeah, tolerance for who? For
Inclusivity.
inclusivity, yeah, maybe.
Adapting to modern developments that help.
Adapting to modern developments, maybe.
You should put a question first.
Applying Judaism to contemporary life.
Okay, contemporary life. Those are all interesting. But what about some values? I mean, I think the thing I was looking towards, and maybe it is about not defining against something else, is that that we prioritize ethics and a social and a good way of life over religious ritual. I mean, long ago we sort of religious ritual, we poo-pooed a lot of it, but I think we're coming back to that. But I think ethical behavior might be at the top of our list, but I think not just for ourselves, but for a just society and values like that. Well, maybe we'll come back to that if we time at the end to judge whether, in your mind, you think we could welcome the prophet Amos as a liberal Jew. Prophet Amos living, and most of his prophecies about 750. So, Laird, if we can have up the first text. And I have to tell you, while this is coming up, that the translation I've put, I haven't put the Hebrew because it's a bit squashed on the screen. The text I've got is, I got for a modern translation from a Christian scholar, Professor Phillips, and it's very much a modern translation, shortening things because I felt that's for 50 minutes. That's all we've got. So who is Amos? Chapter 1. These are the words of Amos. He saw the truth about Israel. At the time, he lived among those who tend the small sheep of Tekoa. And then we get some dates. Uzziah was king of Judah, Jeroboam was king of Israel. And then an interesting comment, it was 2 years before the earthquake. And I have to tell you that I thought this was a clincher. I've been looking up all the commentaries to find out that someone's worked out exactly when the earthquake was. But it was, I haven't found it yet, but it was very clear. It's just interesting. It was such a big earthquake, and we know they get earthquakes in Israel. It's in the Rift Valley and so on. We also know something about him. He tended the small sheep of Tekoa. Well, we know where Tekoa is. It's on the border between the two kingdoms. So we've got the kingdom of Judah in the south and Israel in the north. And Tekoa is more or less on the border. And the setting, it's in the 750, shall we say, before the Common Era. There's still two countries. And he's at a time when in the north, Assyria is beginning to exert its power. Much of his prophecies against Israel in the north, because he sees that as the first one to be in trouble. But he also is very aware of what's going on in Judah, in Jerusalem, because he can. If you're in Tekoa, you can see Jerusalem in the distance, and yet he's also thinking about, as we will see, the northern kingdom of Israel. Most of the other prophets, or several of the other prophets, are after the northern kingdom has already been destroyed. So he's the earliest of these literary prophets. Perhaps the only other thing I can say is that what sort of person is it? Well, we don't know very much. He's a sheep farmer. We also learn later that he tends sycamore figs. And we'll come on that. But it would seem he's sort of fairly middle class. He owns sheep. And I suspect he's not just a shepherd. He's reasonably middle class. But anyway, like all the prophets, you've got to get an audience. And I'm glad to say I've got quite an audience here, so welcome everybody. But what do? I imagine him, and let's say, I don't know, I'll pitch it on Yom Kippur, the year 750 BC. And he gets up in front of a crowd who gathered at one of the shrines. It may not be Jerusalem, although it says Jerusalem there. Yeah, let's say Jerusalem. He's standing there. And he gets up, and a few people begin to listen to him. And he declares, this is what Adonai says, the Eternal One roars from Zion and thunders out of Jerusalem, so that the pasture lands are blighted, and the green ridge of Carmel withers. Of course, amongst other things, you'll notice, he's a brilliant, like most of the prophets, they're great poets, with a typical Hebrew poetry of parallelism. So he starts by the pasture lands, the low down, on the Mediterranean plains, the green ridge. So it goes from the pasture lands up to the hillsides. Anyway, someone want to read me 3 to 5? Jump in there quickly, please. Someone going to read verses 3 to 5 there?
It says, because of outrage after outrage committed by Damascus, I will not relent. For they have battered Gilead, threshed her with iron-studded sledges. For this I will destroy the power of the house of Hazael. I will smash the defenses of Damascus. The people of Syria will go captive to Kir by order of the Eternal One.
Okay, great opening. He doesn't start giving a broch to the Jews standing there. He talks about one of the enemy cities. Can you imagine? He starts, this guy, I want to listen to him. He's talking about Damascus. And then he goes on to say, verse 6 to 8, if someone will read that.
This is what Adonai says.
Yeah.
Because of outrage after outrage committed by Gaza, I will not relent. For they carried off an entire population to sell them as slaves to Edom. For this I will destroy the power of Gaza and overthrow her rulers. I will wipe out the people of Ashdod, the sceptred king of Ashkelon. I will strike my blows until the last Philistine is dead. By order of the Eternal One.
Yeah, well, okay, that's great. So we've got rid. People are thinking, oh, he's not preaching to us. He's preaching about all our enemies. And again, if you notice, he's actually talking around the compass. So he starts up in Damascus. He then goes down to Gaza in the south, and then he goes Tyre, northern Syria. He goes then Edom, which is down in the southeast. And then the Ammonites, I'm not sure where they are. And this is what the Lord says about, Adonai says about Moab. So I can imagine him pointing to the directions of the places. And each one of them, by the way, it's a similar broch about the way in which they behave badly in war. So he's got the people with him. They're listening to him. And then he comes up with verse 4 and 5. Will someone read that for me, please?
This is what Adonai says. Because of outrage after outrage committed by Judah, I will not relent, for they have spurned the word of the Eternal One and failed to keep God's commandments. Therefore, I will destroy the power of Judah and overthrow the rulers in Jerusalem.
Well, actually, if you're an Israelite, you're thinking, okay, it's a bit like Scotland and England. You know, we're in one nation, but we're quite happy if Scotland gets something wrong and we've got it right, and vice versa. So he's working his way down, but I can just imagine the people are beginning to get worried. He's talking about us now. And then he builds up to what he really wants to say, which is verse 6 to 8. What does he say? Verse 6 to 8. This is what Adonai says: because of outrage after outrage committed by Israel, I will not relent. And these wonderful words: for they have sold the innocent for a handful of silver and the needy for a pair of shoes. They grind the faces of the poor into the dust and force the humble out of their rightful way. Father and son use the same temple girl. These were temple prostitutes, and so defile my holy name. Besides every altar, they lounge on garments which they took in pledge, and in the houses of their gods, they drink away the money they impose in fines. Well, okay, now he's getting to the nub of it. He's actually talking to Israel, and he's built up, he's got the people. Now, by the way, each one I said for outrage after outrage, actually in the Hebrew says for 3 things, no, for 4, each time. And you can imagine him, the people more and more gathering around him, more excited and probably chanting the words for outrage after outrage each time. And then they know what to say. He's a brilliant orator. And then what does he say? He comes up with, actually, I want to talk to you. I'm not talking about Gaza. I'm not talking about Damascus. You're the people I want to talk to. And you can just imagine the people's faces dropped when he you know, they loved it talking about Damascus. So if he's going to tell them off, they're not so happy. But then he says, he makes it clear that God can do what he says he's going to do. And verse 13 to 16, someone read for me, please.
Look, I will make you groan in your tracks beneath my weight, as the sheaf-coloured earth groans beneath the weight of a loaded cart. Swiftness of foot will prove no escape. The fighting man will not escape alive, and the fleet of foot will not run clear, nor will the horseman make his escape. This is the order of the Eternal One.
Okay, he says, I'm going to do what I say. There is a consequence. But you notice, you also get the fact that he's talking to the country people. He's using sort of images of what they immediately understand about the loaded cart and so on, the weight of the loaded cart. And one of the great things about Isaiah, we also be able to read his poetry and get an idea of what goes on in the country at the time. And then he says in chapter 3, listen, you people of Israel, to the charge Adonai brings against you, against the whole nation I brought up from Egypt. And this is important. And I think this is the first of the points that where we see him as a liberal Jew. You only have I chosen from all the nations of the earth. Therefore it is you whom I will punish for all your wrongdoings. In other words, we often say we're the chosen people, therefore we're the best. No, he's saying that. You may be the chosen ones, but you have this responsibility as such. You have the responsibility as Jews, we'll call them at the time. And I think that's an important one for us, about the fact that we may think we're important, but we may think we're special. But according to Amos, we're special because we have more responsibility. And we should take that. Not that other people tells us we should better, but he's telling us we should better. And then we get some more of his country background. He's again saying God can do what he says and what God tells us to do. So verse 3 to 8, let's move on to that, please. Someone?
Can 2 walk together unless they have agreed to do so?
Yeah.
Does a lion roar in the forest when there is no prey for him? Does a bird fall to the ground unless it is caught? Does the trap fly up when there is no bird to catch? And do not the people of the city tremble when the alarm is sounded? Can a city suffer disaster unless the Eternal One is its cause? Surely the eternal God does nothing without showing his purpose to his servants and the prophets. When the lion roars, who is not afraid? When the eternal God speaks, who can fail to prophesy?
Okay, so this wonderful stuff about he understands nature. He understands that people were saying that there's cause and effect. And therefore, 11, there's a lovely little sort of, I think it's almost humor here. Therefore, the eternal God says, the land shall be overwhelmed by disaster and your strength shall be stripped from you. As a shepherd may snatch from the mouth of a lion no more than 2 bits of bone or a torn piece of ear, so the children of Israel shall be rescued. All that will be left of Samaria will be a scrap of a couch or a tattered pillow. He's talking now about the future destruction of northern Israel. Of course, at the time, Samaria is how it was referred to as the capital of one of the major cities of the northern Israel. And then look at verse 15. I will strike both winter house and summer house. The ivory paneled houses will be destroyed and the great mansion shall be no more by order of the Eternal One. What a wonderful picture of the wealthy. People who've got 2 homes, not just the winter house and a summer house, the summer house up in the mountains, the winter house lower down, but the ivory paneled houses will be destroyed. He's mocking those, the ultra rich who have these great mansions. And he said, you've got these great mansions, but that's gonna save you when the time comes. And of course, his depiction of society, we're going to come on to, this great, it was a time of relative wealth, strangely, before the eventual destruction in 20 years or so of Israel. It was a time of great wealth, but it was also the time, clearly, of great poverty. It was a time of a growing gap between the rich and the poor. And nothing could, for me, describe the rich like these ivory paneled houses. But then I have to upset some people, but it's not me. You could say, why did I choose this? But I think it also gives me a bit of, it's a bit of humor, because I like Amos. I think he's got quite a humorous way of talking. Listen to this charge, you cows of Bashan, women who glitter on the heights of Samaria, who defraud the poor and ride roughshod over the needy, while you keep ordering your husbands, bring us wine to drink. Well, I don't know, well, I'll probably get done for this, but anyway, to call them cows of Bashan. But we do know that actually in Bashan, it was the area on the other side of the Jordan where Ephraim and Manasseh wanted to go because they knew it was good for cows. So it was a good cow breeding country. So he talks about the wealthy women up there in the heights. Why in the heights? Because that's where it was more pleasant to live. And he says, go up to Bethel and get on with your sinning. Go to Gilgal. By the way, Bethel and Gilgal are 2 shrines. This is before Jerusalem was the single shrine. These were the shrines, these were the temples in his day in Bethel and Gilgal in northern Israel. Yes, bring your sacrifices every morning. Pay your tithes every 3rd day. Burn your bread as a thank offering. And then this lovely one, advertise your freewill gifts. Be sure everyone hears them. What a wonderful phrase. He's mocking these people who pretend to be religious. And I don't want to be anti-Orthodox. Remember those old things in the Orthodox shul on Yom Kippur where people said out loud how much they were going to give. And here he's already knows that this is what rich people did. They wanted to, they were not really being generous. They just wanted to be noticed. For this is what you love to do, you children of Israel. These are the words. And then chapter 5, will someone go on to verses 4 and 7?
This is what the Eternal One says to the house of Israel. Seek me and live. Do not seek Bethel, the house of God, nor go to Gilgal, nor cross the Beersheba. For Gilgal shall know the gall of exile, and the house of God will have lost its meaning. Seek the Eternal One and live, lest Adonai break out like fire, your house of Joseph, a fire which burns and burns, which no one at Bethel can quench. Listen to this, you who have made justice a bitter jest, and integrity of no account.
Okay, all of these towns are places where there were shrines in northern Israel, and again he's warning them against it. But then again, in verse 8 we get this sort of a brilliant sort of picture. God, who made the starry universe, who turned darkness into morning light and darkens day into nightfall, is the one who will fling ruin on the face of the strong and rain destruction upon the fortress. Again, some of you may recognize those opening words. It's surely from that we get one of the opening prayers of our morning service, Yotze Or, who creates light. And then he goes on to talk about society. Verse 10 and 11, will someone come up with that one, please?
They hate the honest witness in court and loathe the man of integrity. Therefore, because you trample on the weak and compel them to give you loads of grain, you may have built stone houses, but they will never be your home. You have planted vineyards for your own pleasure, but you will never drink their wine. For I know how willful are your crimes and how determined are your sins. You browbeat the honest, you take bribes and ignore the claim for justice by the poor. Therefore, the wise man keeps his mouth shut, for the days are full of menace.
Okay, so again, we have this: you've planted vineyards for your own pleasure, but you'll never drink their wine. He's warning them again, so we get a picture of a fairly sort of stable economy and so on. You may have built stone houses. That's a wonderful thing. I always think about Lincoln here. I don't know if any of you know Lincoln. I don't know if Julian Meron is here from Lincoln, but the Jews' houses, they were the ones who had stone houses in Lincoln in the Middle Ages in England, because they were the wealthy, but also it was for protection. But here I think the stone houses.
And Andrew, Gillian just read for you, so it was perfect.
I didn't see that. Yeah, so there you go. So you've got your stone houses of Aaron the Jew in Lincoln, and I think of them often. But he's not doing that. They were, maybe they were for protection here in Israel, but they were more to show off. These are the rich. And then we come up for the first time, because we do get it with the other prophets, but Amos was the first with this theory, verse 21 to 24. I mean, above it, okay, seek good and not evil. We've had that already a couple of times in the morning service, but 21 to 24, what does he say to these people?
I loathe and despise your festival. Your meetings for sacrifice give me no pleasure. You may bring me your burnt offerings, your meal offerings, or your thank offerings of fat cattle, and I shall not so much as look at them. Let me have no more of your noisy hymns. My ears are closed to the music of your harps. Instead, let justice roll on like a mighty river, and integrity flow like a never-failing stream.
Okay, isn't this the essence, one of the essences of liberal Judaism? And we'll come on to later to see that he's not dismissing religion altogether, but he's saying, what are the importance? I mean, here the people who do everything right, but he's saying, I mean, it's such strong words. You can imagine him standing up and saying this outside shul or inside shul, if we were allowed to be there, actually standing up and people saying, the choir sings well, but it's rubbish. The music of the organ we don't want to hear. What's important is justice roll on like a mighty river, integrity like a never-flowing stream. I loathe, I despise your festival. How could he say that? Your meetings for sacrifice give me no pleasure. How could God say that? How could he put that in God's world? You can imagine people feeling, this man's mad, or he's a danger, or he's blasphemous, but he got away with it. Okay. And then chapter 6. Somebody read, please.
You put off the day of reckoning, yet bring nearer the days of misrule. You who lie on beds of ivory and sprawl upon your couches, eating choice lamb and farm-fed veal, who croon to the music of the harp and compose melodies as though you were David himself. You who drink wine by the bowlful and anoint yourselves with the finest oils, but never spare a thought for the terrible miseries of Joseph, For these reasons, you will be the first to go into exile.
That's a wonderful misspelling there, baleful. I think it was baleful. Hopefully it was baleful and not baleful, but anyway, you've missed that one. I don't know if you can go back to that one just for a minute. There was just that lovely, again, his sense, I think of, is it humor? You can correct me on this. You who croon to the music of the harp and compose melodies as though you were David himself. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? You who drink wine by the bowlful, we better have, not bowlful, and anoint yourselves with finest oil. Could there be eating choice lamb and farm-fed veal? This is Amos. This is the 8th century before the Common Era. Isn't it amazing? And yet it could be so modern in his talk about the super rich. Okay, let's go on. Chapter 7. Well, you might ask, surely he's going to get into trouble for this. Verse 10, then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent a message to Jeroboam, king of Israel, saying, Amos is conspiring against you in the very heart of Israel. Amos replied to Amaziah, and these lovely, again, this is a phrase that has got into the English language. I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. I'm a shepherd, and I tend sycamore trees. But it was the Eternal One who took me from herding my little sheep and said, go and prophesy against Israel. Again, and actually, like Jeremiah and like Isaiah, who were in danger of being put to death, we might say. And just I think of all of those times when anyone who would criticize the government, what would happen to them? Just think now of the terrible things that happen in countries against religions who you don't like. Just think of the life of Brian. I always think of this, of getting up and saying what's not thought to be the thing. Just think politically of how many countries now, and yet Amos got away with it. Jeremiah got away with it. Why? Because there was this feeling clearly by the king and the leaders that, well, I don't want to believe what he's saying about this. I don't want to believe this. But maybe he is speaking God's name. Maybe God is there protecting him. And if we get here again, he says, I'm a shepherd and I tend the sycamore trees. What are sycamore trees? I never quite understood this until about 6 years ago. Sharon and I were taken by our friend Beth Rothschild to Israel, and we were taken, there's a botanic garden in Jerusalem. And following our visit, we adopted a project there because they found out in Israel, somewhere down in the Negev, a sycamore fig tree, just one tree. But it was, I think, a male tree. And miraculously, a female tree was found in Jordan. And the two botanical faculties got together and have been fertilizing the tree. It's evidently a tree, a fig tree that can grow in the driest ground. And I always think about it, and I think of Amos. He was tending these trees when they were plentiful, but now due to cooperation between botanists in Israel and Jordan, then maybe they'll be brought back to grow in the dry desert. Okay. Chapter 8. Shall we move on, please? Will someone read this one?
Listen to this, you who trample upon the needy and grind the faces of the poor. You who say, when will the new moon be past so we may sell our grain? When will the Sabbath be over so we may offer our corn for sale? While you make your measure short and your prices high and cheat with buyers' scales, and all to possess the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes, selling for grain the sweepings of your floor.
Okay. Isn't that a wonderful picture of a dishonest commercial society? I just sort of love it. When the Sabbath be over, I hope they're not watching, but I always think, and Sharon will know, I always think about my Orthodox uncle, and had 3 daughters, and at least 2 of the daughters had to follow the rules, but they were not religious at all and didn't like it. They would spend Shabbos afternoon looking at their watches and trying to find another diary or a newspaper with an earlier end to Shabbos. As soon as it was over, they wanted to go. And here were the people who just couldn't wait. They didn't observe the festivals were unimportant. All they were looking at was how soon they could open their shop to get going. And then you think about to make your measure short and your prices high. We're going to hear in the Torah portion this afternoon about the warnings about just balances and so on. So maybe, surely Amos had that in mind as well. So he connects us with this afternoon service. And again, he comes back, this wonderful phrase, to sell the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes. And then he went on in chapter 8, I'll turn your feasts into funerals and your songs into dirges. I'll make your mourning like a lament for an only son, and the end of it will be bitter despair. He's predicting the end for the people, that this society of growing rich and poor and minding only for their own wealth could not survive. Soon something will happen. And then we get another thing in which I call him a liberal Jew. Chapter 9, someone have the pleasure of reading this, at least the first part.
Are you not the same to me, says the Eternal One, as the Ethiopians, you Israelites? Was it not I who brought you up, Israel, out of the land of Egypt? And did I not bring the Philistines from Kaftor and the Assyrians from Kir? Yet I will wipe this sinful nation off the face of the earth. Nevertheless, I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is clear. He's actually saying, you Israelites, you think that I'm your God and that I look after you. I bring you up from Egypt. But I'm also concerned about the other nations. And I dare say, and people can contradict this, is one of the first time, and one of the things which makes me proud to be a Jew, and because he's saying everyone believed that their God was their God who only looked after them. And he's saying that God looks after all nations, has an interest in all nations. And don't think you're special just because you think I'm the God. I look after all nations. And therefore I'm going to punish you. Nevertheless, I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob being Israelite down in the south. And then verse 11 to 12, he's not almost the final words of the book, because you could be very depressed by the book. You could say that he's just talking about destruction. Now, some people would say that as far as it's concerned, this last few verses have been added to sweeten the bitter pill. Well, it possibly is right. It doesn't matter. But it's a nice ending, because I think what Amos was trying to say, you can't carry on like this as a society. Eventually you'll destroy yourself. And he already knew, like the other prophets, they were great. They knew what was going on in the world. He knew that the Assyrians were actually beginning to get powerful and would come down and one day would attack Israel in the northern kingdom. He's saying that. Of course, they didn't listen. And one king of Israel after another, the northern part of it just went from bad to worse. And eventually they were taken, and the people were taken, the 10 tribes were taken into captivity, become the lost 10 tribes of Israel. But at least the book ends, and therefore I think that I'd like to think this is Amos, because I think at the end, I saw this guy with a sense of humor. I saw him with wonderful capacity to observe nature and society around him, and therefore I'd like to think at the end of the day, he'd also have some comforting words to say. And I don't know if anybody would like the honor of reading these positive words at the end. And it always strikes me that when we look at our own society and what's going on, and some of the things which I read into Amos, I think that we have here this feeling of hope that there will be a future. So that's why I want to read me these final words.
In that day, I will raise the fallen tent of David and repair its ruins and rebuild them as in days of old. The days are coming, the Eternal One declares, when the plowman will overtake the reaper and the treader of grapes will overtake the sower. When I bring back the exiles of my people Israel and rebuild deserted cities and live in them, to plant vineyards and drink their wine, to make gardens and eat their fruit. And I will plant them in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I gave them. The Eternal One, your God, has spoken.
Okay, so we have here another of one of the principles of Judaism that comes out of this book, that after that there will be destruction, there will be exile, but the people will come back. And of course, we could trace even the messianic belief that develops in Judaism to Amos's words here. I will raise the fallen tent of David, the belief that the Messiah will come with these mystical connections to the founding King David, as it were. Repair the ruins, rebuild them. And if you wanted a Zionist, a modern Zionist passage, I'm sure some of the early Zionists must have turned this into a poem or a song. It's all there. And that's how the book of Amos, that's how it ends. It's a short book, but I think it's so picturesque in terms of giving us a picture of what society was like at the time that he was dwelling. It gives us an overview of nature, of society, of the people in it. I just love Amos, and he's the first of the Hebrew prophets, and we can trace a number of the teachings that we have from Amos in the prophets that follow, in Hosea, who's the next one down the line, and Isaiah and Jeremiah and so on, a number of whom quote phrases that we already have in Amos. But the question is, was he the first liberal Jew? I don't know, Rabbi Leah, how we sort of open the discussion up to that. We've got perhaps 10 minutes to deal with that. But, or any comments that now
people are allowed to unmute themselves, so people can just jump in. Or if we prefer, then what I can do is I can stop our live stream now, and then people can see other pictures as well, not just you, Andrew.
Okay, well, I've got plenty of faces on the screen for me. I don't know. Okay, so whatever you want. You're the technical expert.
No, people can just unmute themselves and jump in on the conversation, I think.
Okay, so if people have comments, then please do. Please do.
Well, I think very much. This is Gillian Dawson at Wessex. Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Goldstein. It's been a privilege to listen to that. I think very much I agree that those principles of justice and integrity, which are emphasized, is what makes us liberal Jews and must keep coming back to us. Yeah. So I would say yes.
Okay, next comment. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yes, I would. I would agree exactly with what you say, and that's one of the reasons that I'm very happy I ended up in liberal Judaism rather than in United Synagogue, which is where I was bar mitzvah. What struck me about Amos was he was being prophetic. I mean, in the widest sense of the word. If you look at, and I've always felt this for quite a long time, if you look at the great civilizations that there have been, the Egyptian, the Romans, the Assyrians, the Greeks, and so on, all grew fat, lazy, the rich oppressing the poor, and all disintegrated. And I believe for a long time that we are going through, the Western civilization is going through such a change at the moment. We're in the middle of it, so it's very difficult for us to judge. But I believe that's what we're going through at the moment. And you look at the geopolitical situation and so on, and for exactly the same reasons that Amos laid out in his book. I thought it was remarkable, and that's what struck me as I was listening to it.
Yeah. Of course, he knew what was going on. I mean, that's also he and the other Hebrew prophets. I mean, they had a feeling for what was going on in the world around them, and they knew what the dangers were. Now, you could say that, and some of the other prophets make it clear, particularly Jeremiah, that it's bad political decisions. It doesn't have to do with society. It's making the wrong alliances. It's making bad political decisions. I don't want to bring Brexit up now, but maybe Amos would have something, or Jeremiah certainly would have something to say about Brexit. There's no doubt in my mind. But that's so contemporary. And in terms of he knew what was going to happen, and a society that is that weak destroys itself. The real truth is, in the end, as we know through history, that Judah and Israel, they were in the wrong place. Geographically, they're in the wrong place. They're always going to get it in the neck between the northern power and the southern power. They're in the middle, and it needed wise leaders to make sure that they kept out of trouble. But that's another thought. But there's no doubt about it that I think is this the first time somebody can tell me it's wrong? I like to think it's one of the first times that someone disconnected religious ritual with ethical behavior. I mean, up until then, and he makes it clear, so long as you did the sacrifices on time and did the right thing, the gods would be happy. But he's saying...
What was interesting?
Pardon?
What was interesting, though, there's no... Amos said, this is what's going to happen. There was no chance of repentance. There was no chance of turning. Especially today, they weren't given a chance. You didn't say, hey, do it differently.
I think that's a very, I didn't think of it that way. I think that's very true. And of course, the idea of returning the later prophets, all particularly the prophets who are talking down in Judah, may be the prophets who are then talking after the destruction of Israel. And therefore the later prophets from Isaiah and certainly from Jeremiah onwards, they're talking at a time where Israel had already gone. And therefore they could hold up an example. This will happen if you don't come back. But I agree, and I'd have to look. Of course, I didn't include all of the verses there from Amos, knowing we wouldn't have time. But I think that's a pertinent point. But is it implied there is a way back? I think he doesn't use the words which we now take into our masor for our services about return to me, Shuva, return to me and do to Shuva and all the rest of it, and it will go right. I agree, he doesn't do that. But maybe it's there by implication, because he's saying if you carry on like this, disaster is going to happen, and therefore I think there's an implied feeling that it needn't happen if you do something that's different. But any other comments?
Can I make a comment, please, Gary Glover?
Yeah.
It's just that this is my favourite prophet, and I've actually been following you in the JPS translation in the English.
Yeah.
And the rhetoric is so wonderful. Can two walk together without ever having met? So it has all these rhetorical questions. It grasps you. But what is interesting is that Obama, or possibly Martin Luther King, used his quotation, "But let justice well up like water, righteousness like an unfailing stream."
Yeah.
So this is in the English translation. It must be wonderful in the Hebrew. Wonderful writing. When it was written, I don't know, but as you say, it is looking back, probably written at a much later date. However, the rhetoric, the speech, it's just inspiring and wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yes, I love him.
Likewise.
And probably you're quite right. Of course, I had to think about a shortened translation, and I apologise for the occasional misspelling because I typed it out myself. But I'll always remember the bowels of wine. But there you go. You've got to have a smile, because I have a feeling that he had this sort of slightly mischievous, if not sense of humor, sense of looking at things. The way he looked at the ivory houses and he damned that. It warms my heart to read it. Any other comments we got, please?
I thought it was terribly, it was wonderful. I found it very pertinent.
Who's this? Sorry? Who's
Jane.
Jane, right, yeah.
I found it very, I'm sorry, what?
Jane, carry on, Jane.
Very pertinent to me today. It's like the whole idea of the preference of religious ritual rather than actually doing things ethically and kindly, and being seen to be holy, but actually not being holy at all. You know, it was really, really relevant to me at the moment, especially that idea that you do these big grandiose gestures of giving to charity, and you let it drop. Oh yeah, I gave so and so. You know, and it destroys.
Yeah.
Because it makes like you're better than the person you're giving to.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's certainly true. That's a good point. And of course, here we are in the middle of Yom Kippur with our biggest rituals, our biggest, the big day of the year. And that's why, in my mind, it's of course, who knows? I always picture him on Yom Kippur starting his thing. When he's got the biggest congregation there, there's no good doing it when there's no one around. And all of these prophets, we get the same with Jeremiah, we get the same with Isaiah. They have their big numbers to start them off. With Jeremiah, it comes early on. With Isaiah, it's in chapter 6, where they've got the people there. I mean, in those days, they didn't have Zoom. They didn't have this. They had to wait until the people were standing in front of them. But I just love the way Amos actually gets the crowd to listen to him by using this skillful word of repeating for three, he uses the same words, and then the way, as I said, he uses geography to the people, and he picks out the enemies. And so, I mean, let's see what has Judaism gained from Isaiah. I mean, it's gained this basic idea that the God we believe in is the rich, empty ritual. And we have to say that because, of course, you could say he's not against ritual altogether. I don't think he's against the insincere ritual of turning up to shul every week, but in all the rest of the days not following the ethical standard. So that's one thing. The sort of a separation of ritual from ethics of what the God wants. I mean, this is a first. It must be a first in development of religion, I think. But we also add to him the concept of that the rich must look after the poor. That society has to be he's not against the rich, I don't think. Maybe he is, I don't know, because I think he's sort of fairly middle class. He's not down in. He's got businesses going. He's got 2 businesses going, and yet he's okay. And yet he therefore perceives what's wrong with society. We get the idea the first time it comes up of this return after a destruction. We get the idea of a Davidic house. We get the idea of a better future. You say that there's no repentance, and yet those last words, and as I said, we can't guarantee that those came out of his mouth, and we can't guarantee all the words are his. Well, that's what we can do, but we have to imagine it like that, and so we get this germ of an idea that comes up from Amos on through the prophets, that whatever happens, there will be a future, and it may be just a scrap. It may just be initially the remnant. But there will be a future that will come back and will take over. We get from him the idea, all nations thought that they were the best and their God only looked after them. we get this amazing thing that that God also was involved in the history of the Ethiopians. And I always think, and if we want to see Black Lives Matter, who are the Cushites? That's the Hebrew. These were, in modern Hebrew, Cushim were black people. He talks about other nations unlike you from distant Africa, if that's what he meant. And therefore, it just seems so modern. This man living in the maybe the 8th century anyway, before the Common Era. So he's my hero. I think he's an inspiration to liberal Jews, and he always makes me feel good on Yom Kippur to study him. Maybe we should add him. We got some good Haftorahs to come. We got Jonah, but that's for another year. We'll look at Jonah, but for the moment, Amos. And I'm told